Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Bathurst, Mount Panorama. It is the second consecutive day or night, however you want to put it, out of 3 for ASR this year. Last night, it was all about the young guns and the quick fellas, the development series, all the up-and-coming talent deciding a title here at the mountain. And tonight, well, it's not about deciding a title, but this one's about deciding something just a little more important. It's about who's going to start on the front row of the grid and primarily in pole position for the showpiece tomorrow afternoon, the Bathurst 500. There's probably a few drivers in the field we're already penciling in for the front row of the grid, but is there a little bit of a twist in the tail? Will someone make the shootout that we don't expect to? Will there be somebody sitting outside the top 10 that's going to have a bit more work to do on Sunday? In a number of occasions, qualifying isn't the be-all and end-all. It's just all about the bragging rights, and that's what we look forward to tonight. Who's going to be the one that makes all the bragging comments once the session is over? Well, Benjamin Roddy Rhodes, it's round 2 of this year's ASR Enduro Cup, and it's been an interesting opening to proceedings. We've had Tim Redmond and Nathan Higginson take the opening win of the series at the Phillip Island 300. Can they repeat this weekend, or are they going to face a bit more of a sterner test compared to what they had a couple of weeks ago?
Hi Nether, hello everybody else. It's different to be back on the other side of the video feed for tonight as opposed to last night. We got plenty of time over the weekend that we can dissect that if we wish. But no, it's going to be interesting. Higginson very much sort of weighed down by his championship prospects at Phillip Island, yet somehow still came out of the bag. You know, we questioned whether it was even Higginson driving post-race and if he was in the car. But look, I'm not sure whether last night's results are going to do similar things for him or not. There's a lot of energy, but the thing is, it's confirmed energy at this point. It's not what's and ifs. It's pretty well locked in at this point, barring any potential stewards' inquiries that Higginson has lost this year's Super 2 championship, which he notes is his last time to win a championship in probably 5 years' time in a supercar. So I don't know what that's doing for his energy. You know, he's still feeling pretty dejected about it. He's probably still in the there's a word for it, I'm forgetting what it is, but the unbelieving stage, and I'm there too, but I'm not sure whether that's gonna be moto for him or not. But regardless of whether he's on his game or not tonight, and especially this weekend, there's still plenty of other challenges in the field. We see Corey McFarlane, Luke Rosella making their debuts. They missed round 1. Obviously, Will Devonish and Termo quite pacey as well. And the wild card for this round, Dane Warren and Kurt Stenberg in the Super Cheap Auto guest car.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And as you mentioned, 2 of those pairings are probably the ones that I said at the beginning of the intro that we're penciling in for the front row of the grid. The only real question is what order is it going to be in and who's going to be qualifying for each of those 2 cars. The 19 cars, it looks like, that are set up for tonight, and that means that 9 drivers will not make the shootout. So there's another, well, out of the 2 that we expect to be or the 3 probably we expect to be at the front end of the grid. Just looking down the order actually, just to see what the situation is in practice. I reckon probably the top half a dozen in practice at the moment, Rhodey, are probably a lock for being in the shootout, or we would expect them to make the shootout. So I dare say it's position 7 through 10 that are in the most amount of flux here as to, you know, there's probably a good half a dozen or 7 drivers that are going to be fighting over those last 4 spots in the shootout. We have a look at the weekend format. This is how things will shape up. So it's a 2-day event. We did say it's a 3-day run of Bathurst events, but it's a 2-day event for the Enduro Cup. So we're just wrapping up a 2-hour practice session right now. And the drivers are in their drivers' briefing, so they won't be too long before they're finished. 30 minutes for qualifying. It is pretty much a replica of what happens in the real world with Bathurst. So it's the longest qualifying session of the year. Most of the time in our supercars and our development series championships, you find yourself with a 10-minute qualifying session. Development series last night, they got 15. Enduro Cup, Phillip Island, they got 20 when they last rolled out a couple of weeks ago. Bathurst, because it's such a big track, it is a 30-minute session, so there's going to be plenty of time to get plenty of laps in and plenty of time to find space. That's the important thing. You don't want to be catching somebody in the critical spots up over the top of the mountain. So there's plenty of time to make that happen. And then, of course, the top 10 will progress to the top 10 shootout, as is customary for the Bathurst 500 and Bathurst in general when it comes to all things supercars. Then tomorrow, we've got the 2-hour warm-up session, which will start at 11 o'clock. We won't be, of course, covering that on the broadcast. And then the big one, the 81-lap 500-kilometre race to come just sort of after 1 o'clock. We'll get that underway. The point structure, it's 300 points for a win in the 500-kilometre race. It should say 500, not 300. That's an error on my half. And then the points, of course, pay all the way down to 26th place. Now, there's not 26 cars in the series this year. There's a little bit less than that. But importantly, it just means that points pay all the way down. So as long as you finish, you will get points. To be classified, you've got to do the minimum 33 laps tomorrow. So each driver in the 500 has got to do 33 laps minimum out of the 81. Now, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it tomorrow, but that is not quite 3 full stints. It's going to be sort of just a little bit short. So you're going to find yourself with some drivers that are going to take a bit of a gamble, and they're going to try and get their minimum co-driver laps out of the way, but then it's going to put them off sequence to anybody else. So there'll be a few little things that we're going to have to keep an eye at tomorrow, Rhodey, when it comes to the driver minimum laps, and then of course the without standing and without saying, you've got to see the checkered flag, and the car's got to complete 80% of the nominated 81 lap distance to be classified.
Exactly, and that's been a challenge for drivers a few times. I remember I think there's been points, I can't remember if it's actually happened for us, but there have been points in other leagues where you've come to it being an exact rounded figure, and it's been like 0.5 or 0.75 of a lap, which really throws the curveball as to where you are. But no, it's a challenge. A lot of has to work in for drivers tomorrow. Not only their minimum stint times or their minimum driver times in the car for the race, but working into stint lengths and working that into whatever else the race throws at them. There's Bathurst is Bathurst. There's normally always at least one safety car. And I think a few drivers at various points of the race are going to wish for one. And yeah, like that can change your strategy to drop a hat. We saw that last night with Dev Series where a lot of guys were probably pretty confident in their strategy. And then early race safety car came out and it played into the hands of some others. And some others were waiting for the second one that never came. So you've got to roll the dice, but you've got to play what comes to you as well.
That's right, and there's a few people in the grid tonight that are smarting over those decisions that they made last night. We'll start talking about a few of them as the night rolls on, but definitely some wounded pride and a very topsy-turvy race with how that all unfolded with the early race safety car. And it was the first time for a lot of development series drivers that they'd ever seen pit stops. They're not used to doing the pit stops in a race trim, but it was a bit of a special occasion, and it definitely threw a few people for six. And one or two people tried the no-stop strategy when the safety car came out, and it did not work at all. So they were left licking their wounds after the 16 laps were finished yesterday evening. It was actually a rather good broadcast. I was actually really impressed with how NZ Snipes and Lewis Wedding actually handled themselves with me in their ear as a broadcaster with a producing sort of role last night. The first time they've ever done anything of that nature, and first time we've ever done anything like that in ASR, and I think they absolutely smashed it out of the park. So a big tip of my hat to Lewis and for Snipes, not just for the work that they did last night, but for the work that they've done with the development series throughout the course of the year. Of course, the development series will be back next year in a slightly different capacity. I would imagine there's not only going to be a few tracks that will change, but a couple of other things as well. Over to have a look at our track. Speaking of the Bathurst Mount Panorama Circuit, we all know where this place is. We all know how many turns. We all know how many laps are going to be. And we all know how far one lap is around this circuit in terms of distance. But for those of you not in the know, it is the most iconic track, not only here in Australia, but probably the world as well. Carved out of a mountain many, many, many years ago. It's been through many evolutions of safety and layout change and things along the years. The most notable change over the years has been the addition of the chase, back in the late 80s. And that extended, of course, the circuit by 3 turns and by a couple of 100 metres as well. So, Rhodey, what do we make of this ribbon of tarmac in outback New South Wales?
It's Australia's premier racetrack. You could argue there's some that are better facilitated, some that could arguably produce better racing. But it's been the home of Australian motorsport for we're going on to 70 odd years plus now. Built back in the 20s or the 30s, I can't remember exactly when. But built as a tourist road to get around the idea that you can't just go and build a racetrack, but you put a tourist road that happens to be useful as a racetrack. We saw this last night with some of the racing it can produce, and we've tended to have really good races here at Bathurst. Even back to sort of the first enduro, first separate enduro we can pencil in, which was the 500 2020. That was a really cracking race. And then last year, I think I was buried in the grid last year. I didn't catch a lot of it myself, but last year's racing was pretty good as well. And then, as I said, last night, Dev Series, really, like that's what you want to have a championship decider. And I'm not sure whether it was because it was a single race, 300 points, or whether it was the track, but probably both played into that. And it was a really solid race. And we'll probably see the same sort of thing with a full 500k race tomorrow. But I'm pretty keen, and a lot of drivers are keen to see how they go around this track, and especially once they get into a shootout.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I'm going to be keen to see how a number of the development series drivers from last night get on with their double duty, because it's a little bit of a different kettle of fish for them. Of course, there is still an element of aids that are in the series, that they have a limited amount of ABS and a limited amount of traction control, just because it is the development series and it is designed to get people into that first step of supercars. And some of them have elected to wean themselves off of those things over the years, which is great. And then some of them are basically just ripping the Band-Aid off right about now in the Enduro Cup, and just seeing what it actually is like when it comes to running in top tier category. And just keeping an eye out for some of those drivers. I think a lot of them were doing sort of 5s, 6s, 7s and 8s in the development series last night. I think they've found that because of the changes that have gone on with the aids in this particular series, they have indeed got a little bit of work to do. They're probably a good second to second and a half down on outright pace, and they just need to just bring it home. I think the important thing for them is they've got to get their confidence up. They've got to find the right balance with how much brake pressure they want to use, how much brake bias do they want to use to the front of the car, because there's some very heavy stops here, mainly in the last sector of the lap at the chase in the final corner, where the brake temperatures get very, very, very hot indeed, and they do need to get that balance right. They can't have it too far forward because you're going to lock it up. They can't have it too far to the rear because the rear's going to lock up and step out from alongside you. So you've got to be super careful when you're a rookie coming into the top tier series about how you set yourself up and what sort of changes you want to make. Qualifying is now underway. It is official. The clock is counting down, and here comes the field. I think there was just one last car just managing to make it into the server. It was indeed Steve Warwick. He actually must have bailed at the very, very last minute and has made it out in time for qualifying. So the rule is a little bit different this year when it comes to all things qualifying. We set it up in such a way that if you drop out of qualifying in the first 2 minutes, which covers the out laps for a lot of these drivers, you are permitted to get back into the server. Outside of that, you're out. Normally the qualifying sessions are locked to prevent the game seizing and freezing for a number of drivers when they drop out or when they're on hot laps, that get affected by those sorts of things. But it's a self-policing thing tonight. If you're out at the beginning of qualifying, you've got 2 minutes to get in, which of course Steve Warwick has just done. But outside of that, once the first flying laps commence, that is it. If your game gives up the ghost, you're out for the night.
Absolutely. Just trying to chase around a player who's at the head of the queue at this point. I think it might actually be Dane Liccardo who heads the train out in the CISO Motorsport by CRE number 735.
Yeah, it looks like he is indeed the man at the head of the queue.
No,
it's not. Sorry, it's Daniel Cox. Daniel Cox, a bit further
Daniel
up,
Cox, yes,
is the man that's actually out the gate. Now, he's actually been one of the perennial people to be out the gate quite early, I think, when it comes to all things qualifying. Even in supercars this year,
Yeah, no, Coxie's had a really solid year, and yeah, he's probably prided himself on getting out early in the qualifying session. It gives him plenty of clear track to work with, and it gives him the free space to work with on track. It lets him dictate the terms of the traffic around him. He's got the ability to back the train up or to just pull away from the train. Normally, he's actually timed it pretty well as well. That there are drivers that are quicker than him, but they've started far enough back because they need the spacing that he doesn't get caught up either. So he will be leading us out for the first qualifying lap of this shootout.
He certainly will. Just keeping an eye on a couple of the other drivers a bit further down the grid. Already a couple of mistakes coming to the checkered flag to start flying laps as well for a few people. Just bowling it at the first corner, the final corner. So already ruining the start of their lap. And Felipe won. I think there was another one in there as well. Plenty of space up and down Mountain Straight as well at the moment for about the top half a dozen cars. So there's plenty of track for them to find their group. But then there's a massive train a bit further down the order. I think it might be headed by Dane Warren and potentially Tim Redmond in there as well. There's about 4 or 5 cars all in a row heading up Mountain Straight. So one particular mistake from any of them could prove to be quite costly. Actually, there is Dane Warren in the Super Cheap Auto Machine. He's got Redmond, he's got Noah Turra, and I think there might be Phil Boak in there as well. So if any of them make a mistake, the others are going to pay for the infraction as a result of running into another car. Daniel Cox is the first one that we're keeping an eye on at the moment, down to the elbow. Lock up, he's locked up twice on this lap. First one's, and he's very sideways. He got the fence on the exit of the elbow as well, so that's going to hurt the straightaway speed of the CRE and Anson Motorsport machine. There's been a big incident at the top of the hill. It might be Hans Brunswick as well. That I've just noticed on the other side of the screen has had a moment and gone around at the top of the at Skyline. We'll have a look at that on the replay in just a few moments' time. But for the moment, we'll stay with Cox. He, of course, is down to the last few hundred metres of the circuit to set the first flying lap for the 915 ZB Commodore. Here he comes. And to the line, and he's going to be into the low sixes, so it's a 6-1 for Cox. Let's have a look at this replay for, actually, I haven't got the replay sort of ready just yet for Brunswick. We'll pick that up in just a few seconds.
Yeah, no, that was a really good starter lap for Daniel Cox. He has been gazumped very slightly, though, by Dane Liccardo and actually Bailey Hall, and Corey McFarlane now goes to the top. 2 seconds up on Dane's time with Brennan Rossi slipping in. We're getting a lot of times coming in now. Dane Warren currently to the top of the pile, and I reckon I can confidently say that because I feel like he's going to be pretty comfortable up there, at least for the first lap. He's done a 2:03.338 to get there and just put him half second clear of Corey McFarlane in second. There's that incident for Hans Brunswick on the chat there as well. He's right in front of Dane Warren as well. Lucky there was a chance for Warren to sneak through. So that's very lucky. He's actually out going again, Brunswick, so no harm, no foul. He's got already behind the 8 ball a little bit. So as you said, Rody, no surprises. Who's at the head of the field at the moment? Actual fact, the track qualifying records from Luke Rosella last year have actually already been broken by 2 drivers, unsurprisingly, with McFarlane and Warren both into the 3s as we stand right now. There's a couple, as I said before, a couple of drivers in the field that are smarting a little bit from their performances last night. This guy's one of them, Noah Turra. He had a massive fall from grace last night, was on the front row of the grid, got sort of caught in a bit of an indecisive moment when it came to his pit stop requirements for when the early safety car came out yesterday, and didn't pit. And then when it got to about lap 14 and he was trying to make it to the checkered flag, he actually found himself a bit short on fuel and consequently tumbled down the grid. Yeah, there's a few guys that got caught out. The guy we were flying earlier, sorry, no, it wasn't the guy we were flying. Sorry, I was throwing my drivers up, but no, he was one of them. A couple of drivers that actually fell out. Bratt was a key example. Bratt was prepping, I think, like a week in advance. We were discussing stuff on Monday. He was asking me, were pit stops mandatory, and what I thought about a single stop. And yeah, I don't know what. To be fair, he nearly got there. I think he had he needed maybe an extra 100 mil of fuel, and he just ended up in the end getting assist across the line by Lockie Lock in the end, which potential temp implications in that. But no, look, Noah's smarting, but Noah's had some really, really good pace this year in Dev Series. He hasn't been able to make the full season, but when he's been there, oh look, he's been class of the field kind of stuff. Sort of the similar stuff that we've seen, with I think sort of Kurt Stenberg and Luke Rosella in the supercars. And even I haven't seen much of the R-Factor 2 GT3 series, but I think even back to GT3 in AMS 1, we had a couple of drivers disappear at the front as well. So similar sort of just cut above performance. And the Enduro Cup's a really good chance for him to flex his muscle, because he's actually still got some championship or some rivals as such to work with. He is currently just behind Cox in 11th, so he's right on the cusp of where the shootout will take place. But he's still got the best part of 23 minutes before he's really going to worry about that.
Absolutely. He's on an outlap at the moment, Noah Tara, while we watch Bailey Hall just skimming the walls on the way down through the dip up. His father was a bit upset with his own performance at Phillip Island with Noah Tara. It was a massive recovery drive for them. Greg was sort of very apologetic to having, I think, 3 spins inside his opening stint, and then handing it over to Noah. The car went a lap down, and they were forever in a recovery mode ever since. But they got a chance to redeem themselves tonight, and Noah's probably one of the ones I expect will make the shootout. His practice pace was around 6th overall, and he was probably the last of my 6 that I was expecting to make the shootout. So if I'm being honest here, the top 6 that I'm expecting to make it in regardless will be Warren Stenberg, McFarlane and Rosella, they're a given. Brendan Ross and Lewis Wedding will make it. Will Devonish and Turmo, because Will's in that car. Tim Redmond and Nathan Higginson in their machine. And then probably Noah Turra and Greg Turra I expect to be in there as well. The rest of it, I think, is a little bit of an interesting dilemma. You've got the likes of Liccardo, Stancliffe, Phil Boak, Bailey Hall, Daniel Cox, Hans Brunswick and Lockie Lock. I think they're the 7 that are sort of looking at those last 4 spots inside the top 10 and wondering where they're going to end up. You reckon that's probably a fair assessment, Rhodey? They're probably the 7 looking in for those last 4?
I think so, yeah. It's sort of the guys that we're seeing in the top 10 at the moment. You're right, Tim Redmond should be up there, and he'll be putting in some laps on his own. The one actually I'm surprised to see up at the moment is Boki. Boki's had some good pace this season, but he's only been able to make a couple of the Dev Series rounds. I talked to him about next year's planning a little while ago, and Friday nights have been a struggle for him this year with other commitments. So he's not really had a chance to show his pace, but he is an ex-Supercars runner, so it's good to see him up there. He's out there qualifying the car for Foley tonight. Foley, arguably the quicker driver, obviously still a current Supercars runner, and he's got a lot of racing experience, but Foley just not available for tonight. So Boki's putting in a good showing for the PBF 046. But yeah, otherwise, look, those drivers you listed, yeah, it's probably a good jumble. So yeah, there's a very good 5 or 6 that at this stage should be in the shootout, and I think of that, Noah Turra is the probably the exception to that rule at the moment. But yeah, it's still that bottom 4 is really a bottom 7, and look, we saw this with shootouts throughout the season, where it was down to tenths or even hundredths of a second. I think we got even a couple of thousandths at one point. I think it may have been for Gold Coast between who made the 10 and who didn't. So yeah, there's been some really tight sessions, and I can see this one going the same way.
Yeah, I agree. We've only got one car that hasn't set a time in the qualifying session so far, and that's the Ignition Sim Racing car that's being piloted by Ed Filippi tonight. He's actually bowled a few moves at a couple of corners as well. He was one of the ones that butchered his opening lap. That's the number 158 Ignition Sim Racing car. There, of course, is a second one, which is the 85 machine. There's been a couple of driver changes throughout the first 2 rounds for those 2 cars. The original pilots that have had, unfortunately, some real-life commitments come up. They've managed to draft in a couple of substitutes, so they've managed to keep those cars out and circulating, which is great to see. Now, Phil Boak on this lap is actually catching the KSS under development squad number 422 here of Damon and Luke Yeager, who gets out of the way at Forest Elbow. Did that hurt the clock at all? I think it did by a little bit. I think Boak may have been down at the first split anyway, and probably just got a little bit distracted by the lap traffic as he heads down Conroy Straight, up over the rise and down the other side into the chase. The fastest speeds we've been seeing throughout the practice sessions so far in the week, they've been maxing out at 297 kilometres an hour at the speed trap. So they always say in real life supercars, they say 300 kilometres an hour. It's actually never ever been the case, apart from one or two very, very small times where that's happened. Oh, the rear end wants to get away from Boak as he gets into the final corner, and he actually got a track violation in the last sector on that lap as well. So he goes again. Still again, plenty of time left on the clock. Not quite half distance, still plenty of time in this session to go. Right now, Rhodey, who is not where you expect them to be? Who's a little bit further up the grid than what you were expecting, and who's a bit further down the grid than what you were expecting?
Look, I did mention Boki earlier, although he is starting to filter back. I'll be honest, I'd like to see Boki in the shade. Obviously, I'm not going to throw shade at my drivers, especially at one of my team bosses, but look, Boki's basically didn't expect him to be in the top 10. One driver I do expect to be up there, who's maybe not quite up there at the moment, is Hans Brunswick. Although he does sit in 12th currently, but Hans, you know, he's been pretty good pace this year. When he has been able to make supercars rounds, he's been out fighting the top 4, the top 5. He's only really able to fight with sort of half of that top 4 or top 5 in qualifying, because a lot of the sort of A drivers are sharing cars for the Enduro Cup. So that said, he did only get in the server. I think he only got like essentially a sighting lap or an installation lap in before the qualifying session started. So I suspect he's probably just getting back into the swing of things. I know AAR, we mentioned when we talked to Luke at Pukekohe that AAR had, you know, had done very little prep at all at the time.
Brunswick with a bit of a moment, a bit of a wobble coming into the final corner. That's upset the balance of that car. It does put him into the 10 though, so he did improve his times throughout the 3 sectors on his last lap. Could have been probably a little bit better, I would have thought, based on the last few hundred metres of the track where he got a little bit of the grass, car got loose, he then missed the apex at Murray's and then stood on the loud pedal a little bit too early and the tail wagged the dog, and he just managed to get to the line with about 0.8 of a second improvement. So he probably could have gained a little bit more time and maybe slotted in ahead of Boak or potentially Bailey Hall. But that's a real interesting point that Brunswick's just managed to do there, because he is now ahead on track of Tim Redmond. There's a gaggle of cars, Rhodey, at the back end of this top 10 right now. So you've got Liccardo 7th, he's 2.6 seconds off the lead. Then you've got Hall a 10th behind him, Boak a 10th behind him, Brunswick about half a 10th behind him, Redmond a half a 10th behind him, and then Cox about a 10th behind him. So there's some very, very tight packs, especially on the back fringe of this top 10. And I guess you could probably throw Noah Tara in 6th place into that one as well. That lap time of his that he's done with a 2:05.5, that would have been good enough last night for pole.
Yeah, no, that was a really good lap, and you're right. If he'd been able to pull that out last night, it would have put him on pole position. But yeah, I apologise. I've been a little fluffed. I've been catching up with something else at the same time. But no, that would have been a really good lap. Actually, it's been good pace as well. Someone that would have been pretty well. And I say this only because he's been asking about this all season. Dan Liccardo, he has slipped a little bit. He's currently in 7th though. That lap time would have put him pretty well last night as well. And I'm saying this only as I mentioned, because he has been begging us all year that he's too slow for supercars, and you know he can't handle it with the big boys. And here he is running 7th currently, and he's probably got a bit more pace on board that car yet again. But yeah.
Just keep an eye. There's a few drivers that have actually been. Looked like I thought they may have made the fence. John McDonald was one of them. It looked like he was just getting out of the way up at Forest Elbow, but he came very close to clouding the tyre barrier at that part of the track as well. So through the second turn goes Tim Redmond. He's got Liccardo behind him, and he got Will Devonish in tow. So we're now beyond the half distance mark of the qualifying session here. So just over, or just under 14 minutes remaining, rather. It's been one of those sort of days. There's a few other drivers up down the field that are looking like they're just settling in here for the long haul. You've got people like, I think, Peter Thrower, Lockie Lock and NZ Snipes, who's on screen at the moment. They're just looking, I think, just to get whatever starting position they possibly can for tomorrow's race. We are getting some word through that there is another one of the cars that didn't make qualifying tonight, which is the number 85 Ignition Sims racing machine with Hayden Cupid and his co-pilot that are getting ready to tackle the mountain. They just didn't make qualifying tonight. So there'll be 22 cars at this stage tomorrow. A couple of other cars I've noticed that are missing in this one. I don't think the Vivid Esports number 66 is out there tonight. They were present at Phillip Island, so we haven't seen them. And there's one more off the top of my head that just escapes my memory for the moment that we are missing as well.
I've just seen, I need to know, oh, actually I think that was John McDonald who's made a complete hash of the run out of, that was John McDonald, made a complete hash of the run under the tree.
Yep.
I was watching Bailey Hall and I just saw a very familiar bonnet go flying across the front of the camera. So I'm not sure how he's done that, but he's actually nearly rolled over the fence, I think.
Yeah, we're about to find out here. Let's have a look on the replay. He was off to the side of the road here at the top of the hill somewhere. He's coming up through Reed Park now. Did he get the side of the tree? Oh, he's just lit it up. Oh, whack. He actually hit the same spot that Nathan Higginson hit last night, and that's a nasty lick. That would be a red flag if this wasn't a sim race.
Yeah, like it's a weird thing how that works out. Similar spot, similar speeds to Higginson last night, but Higginson gets away with no damage and still finishes second in the race. And McDonald rips a bonnet off, and I think he ripped a wheel off as well, and is forced to go to the pits. And it's funny how luck plays that way. It's just a couple of k's difference in speed or a slightly different angle hitting the wall, or even what you do pre or post the wall, that's worked out. But look, in the end, he's got back out on the track. He is now running up the hill to get another run in, and we are approaching the back third of the session, which we're going to start to see some of those times really shake out.
Absolutely. So, what's McDonald's time at the moment, actually? At 8.6. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Rody, he was around that mark last night, if memory serves me correctly. He was pretty good.
This is pretty close to a PB for John, and it's probably pretty close to a PB for the car as well. It's just everybody's been sitting on something for pace. Like John ended up running. He was 7th until he looped at the last corner. He still finished in the top 10 last night. But that's the thing as well. To be fair,
oh, and he's hit the wall again.
He has hit the wall again. Maybe just the adjustment to the actually having a setup versus the default setup. Maybe have to tweak the drone style a little bit. Might see a bit more race pace out of that car than qualifying pace, but yeah, it's what it is. To be fair, like for drivers outside the shootout, you really just want to get a decent position in and just get when you're comfortable to start from as well, because it doesn't necessarily do too many favors if you get qualified by one of your faster drivers and then the slow driver starts and is sitting there battling essentially just to stay out of the fence in the first 5 laps because everyone around you is racing, half a second quicker than you can.
That's right. Well, Noah Tara's advanced a couple of more spots now, so he's up to 8th place, and he's improved his time by about 3/10. So I wouldn't say that's quite safe just yet. If we were development series last night, a 5.2 in qualifying would have seen you in the top 2 rows quite comfortably. Whereas 5.2 right now, I think, Rody, realistically, it's probably the cutoff, I would say, to get into the shootout. You've got Dane Liccardo and Phil Boak behind, both on 5.4s. Actually, Bailey Hall on a 5.4 as well. And then Cox on a 5.8, Peter Thrower on a 5.9. So I think a low 5, you've got to be in the low 5 to really even have any realistic chance of being in the shootout. But probably the closer you can get to a 5 flat, will see you in.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think much like, not quite the same as say like an FP2, a Q1, Q2, Q3 situation where there's going to be massive time differences to make that next step up. But yeah, I still reckon there's probably some drivers in the field, probably a bit further back. People like Lockie Lock was in the top 10 in practice. I think Bailey Hall was top 10 in practice. Few drivers that probably, even from the guys at the front, that are probably still sitting on laps. The only one I'd probably say that's probably about the pace you expect them to be is maybe the guys right at the front, where they're pretty comfortable. Dane's done a 2:02.6, so that's probably where he's currently sitting. With Corey McFarlane about a second behind. He is still out there lapping with a 2:03.5, but he's actually just coming to the pit lane as I've said that. But they're sort of drivers I think are probably giving away, well, probably not giving away 10 tenths, but they've probably got 9 tenths on the board right now. But they don't need to give away too much more because they're pretty comfortably in. But I wouldn't be surprised if some drivers, I mentioned Bailey Hall 1, he's had some interesting pace this year, obviously. Super 2 with assists and Super 3 with assists, he's been pretty good. The first run in Supercars without the assists, the pace didn't quite go his way, but he went back to the drawing board, came back for Pookie and actually outraced his team boss that he was subbing in Pixel Sim Sports in both races. You know, he's got some good pace under that car. He's been putting I think a fair boatload of practice. Probably not the most of the guys in the field. I know, like Braxton historically has been a big practicer, and he's up there currently. But you know, Bailey's has a pretty good pace. So I expect to see Bailey drop up, and maybe he's not so much hiding pace. He just isn't quite on it. I mean, he is 5/1000ths off of the top 10. Currently, that's his gap between him and Boak, and that's so the gaps we expect to see from cars outside the top 10 is you know minuscule difference, like paper width, thickness. But yeah, the other one I mentioned as well, Lockie Lock, he was in the top 10 in practice. Practice doesn't really mean anything, to be fair, so there's probably some drivers that weren't out there pushing. Hans Brunswick, I know for one who wasn't setting times in practice because he wasn't there. But look, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Lockie's got a bit more pace, but maybe he's just not able to put it together just yet.
Yeah, I think so. And there's already now starting to become a little bit of a drama for some of the people that are trying to get into the top 10, and that word is traffic. You saw Liccardo on that last lap coming across Luke Yeager, and Damar precisely the wrong moment over the top of the hill. He was up at the first sector split, then lost all the time coming down through sector 2. So timing your run inside these last 7 minutes is going to be very, very important. There's a number of drivers that are just looking to try and put themselves in a good starting spot, and then there's drivers that are trying to get into the shootout. And some of them, I think, are probably going to have to bite the bullet right about now in the next sort of 30 seconds to 60 seconds and actually go back to the pits and put their last set of fresh tyres on and then jump out onto the track and try and get themselves into the 10. So the ones that are safe, let's look at the ones that are safe right now in the 10. So Dane Warren, Corey McFarlane, they are definitely safe. Brendan Ross on a 204 flat, I'd say he's safe. This man on screen, Will Devenish, with a 4.2, I'd say he is safe as well. Then you got Hans Brunswick on a 4.8 and Braxton Stancliffe on a 5 flat. Noah Turra's now moved on to a 5 flat as well, with Redmond on a 5.1. I'm sort of looking at it now, Rhodey, and thinking that Braxton Stancliffe, Noah Turra, Tim Redmond around 5th, 6th and 7th, that's starting to become a little bit congested and could potentially go either way. I did say that a 5 flat was probably the cut-off to get in. Redmond, I think, probably needs to get his skates on a little bit. He's definitely got a 4 in that car. I think we've seen him do a 4 at some point across the practice sessions so far this week. And then you've got Liccardo 4.16, Philip Boak 4.88, Bailey Hall 4.93, and then Daniel Cox is still yet to move the marker off of his 5.876. So it's all starting to come to a head now. These last few spots inside the top 10 start to become very, very coveted in the closing 5 minutes.
Yeah, so we're really fallen into the window now where, as I mentioned, drivers that are sitting on a 10th or 2's worth of pace, that, have still got a little bit to, maybe a little bit either they're not showing or that they haven't quite been able to put together yet. This is really the crunch time for them to put this up together. Definitely for the guys in the shootout to sort the order out in terms of positions, because definitely getting the shootout is one thing, but I know, and I put my hand up and I've said it before, I have made mistakes in ordering shootout before, and it does matter for drivers and cars and track time. The other priority is getting out the shootout as late as possible to get by qualifying higher, because the track is more rubbered. I think as the session actually goes for timing, the track might actually be a little bit cooler as well, which does play in a little bit nicer for sort of keeping the tyre temp in a good window, helping to cool the brakes down. IRL would play into giving you a bit more aero drag, which you might potentially want as well. Yeah, that's the other push for some of these drivers. So, people like at the moment Boki, Dane Liccardo, Bailey Hall, Coxie as well. Actually, he's improving and he's looking like he's maybe challenging for the 10 as well. And I'd argue maybe even he's looking pretty comfortable at the moment, but I don't know how much pace people are seeing on. People like maybe Noah and Chara and Braxton Stancliffe, their focus is more just sort of staying in the 10.
Carhart in the wall. There's a Carhart in the wall at the elbow, and I believe that was the PB, or one of the machines belonging to the Kiwis. I think it was the Damo and Luke Yeager machine. Yeah, it was coming down the hill, and Bailey Hall was right on the scene as that accident was happening. I think he may have just avoided it. So let's have a look. So mistakes haven't been all that common from what we've been able to capture so far on the broadcast. He lost the rear and thankfully spins out of the way of Hall's car.
Yeah, no, that was. I will say actually, you know, qualifying session, you expect to see people driving at 10, and you see people having monumental crashes. Well, ideally people don't have monumental crashes, but it's the place you expect to see them happen. We saw this with we did see this John Renaud earlier. But you're right, and it's probably probably what's helped out for the guys in terms of their mental picture. We talk about this like enduros, that you're not cracking on too hard too early. You've got a half-hour session to set times in. Granted, yeah, the guys at the top end are going to wait until the last 2 or 3 minutes to set those times that they really need to set. But if you're just trying to set your fastest time, you've got the best part of probably 13, 14 laps if you just go continuously, and you can probably still break it up into, 2 or probably 3, 4 lap windows that you can really just sit down knuckly and get your time in. That's probably what's kept the qualifying session relatively clean. It's just that you haven't had to go for broke that hard that early and try and rush yourself through qualifying.
No, you're right there. And we're just keeping an eye on all these people that are sort of clustered around the back end of the top 10. So Noah Tara, Dane Liccardo, Phil Boak, Bailey Hall, Daniel Cox. Actually, Cox has improved his time to a 5.6 now down to a 5.5, but it's still not good enough to jump over the top of Hall, Boak and Liccardo. He's still got to find about another 2/10 to make that a reality. And this is his last lap as well. So he's just gone across the line. Liccardo's going to come down to the final corner now with about 1 minute and 20 seconds on the clock. Just looking at the map, just trying to work out who's probably going to be the last one to get their lap. What have you spotted, Rody?
I've just, Braxton Stancliffe, he completely, I'm not sure whether he had a brake failure coming across the top of the hill, but I was just watching, I think it was the Matt Cecil car, and he's yeeted across the back of the, camera, so he's, I'm not sure if he had a brake failure coming into, actually no, I think he's clattered the wall, but that was a monumental crash.
Here we go. Oh, he's very tail happy coming up the hill through Reed Park, now down the hill, and yep, got the wall there. And what happened around here? Oh, he got the inside wall fired right across the road. Jesus, if he was a real life driver, that would have absolutely killed him. And then lucky not to bounce back onto the track in front of his countryman in Peter Thrower. But importantly for Braxton Stancliffe, that's it for him. So he is not going to be able to get out and get another lap in. He is currently 6th in the running order on a 4.8, and I would say is safe.
I think so, yeah. He's probably...
And Bailey Hall's has pulled the pin. So Bailey Hall, who's currently in 11th spot, has come back to the pits and given up. So he's resigned to the fact he's not going to make it into the 10. Brunswick gets another lap, and NZ Snipes gets another lap, and that's it. So drivers coming to the line now. They are the ones that are finishing. So Noah Tara's 8th. So he's gone to the pits. So he feels that he's done enough. John McDonald, he's done. He's finishing 19th. Liccardo is the one of interest here. He was 2/10 down on his own PB at the second sector split. Heading up over the rise now, down towards the chase. Can he find anything in this last sector? I got a feeling he needs to just find a little bit of an insurance policy here just to make sure he stays inside the 10 because it's extremely tight. Felipe across the line just ahead of him on the track, doesn't improve, remains 18th. Liccardo to the line now, used all the boom, that's not going to improve the time, he's going to stay 9th. So for him, he's got to sit and wait right now, he's got no choice. Where is the likes of Daniel Cox, who's currently 12th in the running order? He's done. Cox is done, so he hasn't improved. So Hall didn't improve, Cox didn't improve. So the top 10, barring any real drastic changes from outside from the likes of Peter Thrower, Justin Cecil, and the man on screen, Steve Warwick, the top 10 will be settled. So not really a massive climactic finish to qualifying for the shootout like we've seen in years gone past. It's been settled fairly early. Steve Warwick's pulling the pin. He's going to start 15th, and there has been a bit of a upheaval with a late driver change for that car as well in the last couple of hours or so, and we'll allude more on that tomorrow. Did Peter Thrower improve his time at all? He comes to the line, and no, he misses out on matching his own PB by about 2/10. And Justin Cecil's done. He was just on another lap. So he's going to start tomorrow's race from 17th place. John McDonald, we said, was 20th. Matt Cecil, 19th, is still on track. And the only other car that we alluded to was the Daniel Cox machine, who's coming back to the pits now. So that settles the top 10 roadies. So in reverse order going out in the shootout, it's going to be Phil Boak, Dane Liccardo, Noah Tara, Tim Redmond, Braxton Stancliffe, Hans Brunswick, Brendan Ross, who was passed late in that session by Will Devonish for third place, and then Corey McFarlane and Dane Warren. That's going to be the 10 drivers who tackle the top 10 shootout.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we called it, I think, in the opening remarks where we thought the top two were going to be. Granted, they've still got to run the shootout itself, and it's got to be it's got to be obviously we've got to turn around and set those times, those positions again in the shootout. But yeah, in the end of the breakdown, you're right. Dane first, Corey second, Will third. That's probably pretty good. That's probably really good for what Will was expecting to get. Rossi in fourth, another good run for Rossi for, the second worst driver in the Supercar Championship, he keeps telling us. And I've just missed the rest of the break as the service ticked over, so I'm going to have a quick look at live races to grab the rest of them. Yeah, Hans Brunswick in fifth for relatively little practice we saw in the server. That was pretty good. Braxton Stancliffe sixth. Tim Redmond seventh. Braxton actually the fastest of the Kiwis. That's a bit of a bragging point for him. Noah Tyler ends up in eighth, which really, rewards how he's been doing in Dev Series this year. Dane Liccardo in ninth, and Phil Boak, he did just squeak into that top 10. And as I mentioned, actually, that .005 gap stayed. So Bailey Hall was not able to improve. And that he's going to be kicking himself for that, because that's not really a big gap to overcome, but it didn't need to, it just wasn't enough in the end. So yeah, Phil Boak will be the first out for the shootout. And look, it's somewhat what I expected, but at the same time, look, there are a couple guys in there that, I'll be honest, as I said during the session, that I didn't expect to be in the top 10. So really good run from a couple of those drivers.
Absolutely, and we were kind of right. It was about 5, 6 or 7 drivers that were waiting for that opportunity to try and snatch those last 4 spots inside the top 10 shootout, and they were the drivers we were sort of expecting. About halfway through that session, we had a look at and gone, okay, there are, these are the drivers, and they'll be fighting over the end of it, and that was it. And we were pretty much spot on the money. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a very brief pause here for a few moments while we get a number of drivers that did not make the shootout out of the server. We're then going to roll the server around and reset it up for the shootout. So we'll be back on the other side of these messages in just a few moments. Don't go anywhere. The 2022 ASR Supercars Championship is proudly brought to you by Cam Rutledge Electrical, a licensed electrical contractor in Nowra, New South Wales. And Beyond Electrical, specialists in electrical, domestic, commercial, industrial and maintenance work in Auckland, New Zealand. The ASR team would also like to pay thanks to those businesses that helped us over the course of the 2021 season. Matt Harvey Repair and Tune, Smith & Sons Renovations and Extensions, Design, Plan, Construct. Penrite, a better class of oil since 1926. Ryco Filters, the professional's choice since 1936. And Milwaukee Tool, nothing but heavy duty. Bit of a shortened break there, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of things that we're just organising behind the scenes to get everybody for the shootout into the server and make it happen. So the top 10 is set, and at least the order for they're going to go out in is set, and then positions 11 through to 21 are also set for the race tomorrow. Rhodey, we did make mention at the beginning of the broadcast, we pretty much know who the front row is going to be comprised of when we get to the end of tonight, or what we expect to happen, I should say. What else do you think is going to happen? Do you think that there's probably a bit of a surprise twist? Historically, shootouts have changed a few things here in the past compared to the order that they've gone into at the beginning of, or come out of the end of qualifying. There's always been a couple of positions that have gone up or down. I remember things like Lime Mitch being the perennial man over one fast lap. When one fast lap was all was required, he would deliver and he would, advance himself maybe 2 or 3 spots up the order. We've seen it happen here before, and I'm wondering, do you think we'll see it again?
It's entirely possible. Look, there's as I mentioned, there's some drivers, the Q2, Q3 transition. It's like there's some drivers that are be in the shootout that either that have done enough to get into the shootout without necessarily needing to qualify in the position. Be some drivers that knew they were comfortable and were holding on to a 10th or 2 because it would qualify. Well, it would not so qualify. It would show their performance to the guys they're trying to race against, ahead of when it was necessary. And the other thing as well is the shootout is there'll be some guys in here, especially those that are maybe qualified, that have not got in here because they plan to be here, that will potentially be a little safe with their laps. Like I know Will's got nightmares from, I think it was 2020 or 2019, when he piled into the wall during the shootout and started off the back of the grid. Like we mentioned this with Kurt Stenberg and Supercars coming into Gold Coast, being the year before in Enduro Cup, that he was having flashbacks from that as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Will's pretty well up there, but I wouldn't be surprised if Will's maybe gonna take it maybe top a 10th of his pace to make sure he does set a time. Because look, when you got the pace, qualifying maybe doesn't even matter too much to you, but it is always preferable to have less cars to worry about having to pass. So that's sort of the that's sort of the priority for some of these drivers. So it's the gamble. So for some drivers like Noah Taro is probably one example that might not necessarily go full 10/10s. That said, shootout is pretty good running for him, and so I wouldn't be surprised if he goes balls to the wall just to really roll the dice. Dane Liccardo, I know, is one who's out there. He's gonna have a crack. Braxton Stancliffe as well. They're gonna both definitely send it. Probably Owens Brunswick as well into that bargain. The only one I probably, to be fair, I was looking at the side of this, and I'm gonna have to go and eat Boki's hat, because I said he wasn't making the shootout, and he made it into the shootout. And I don't think he's necessarily going to go 10/10s, but look, he's made it to the shootout, so he might as well. He doesn't have much to lose, because his worst qualifying position will now be 10th. So yeah, some drivers might just go off that bargaining argument that, look, they're going to finish 10th at worst, and in Boki's case, he qualified in 10th, and he'll be about to leave the lane soon. Why not have a crack?
Absolutely. I think if you're right, if you feel Boak, you've got absolutely nothing to lose. First man out, we say this all the time. First man out has always got nothing to lose, because they can only go up from where they qualified. That's it. Anybody else that's a bit further up the order, you've got to balance that little act of, do you go balls to the wall, try and set the best possible time you can, or do you have to leave a little bit of something on the table and just make sure you get the lap in, because you haven't got that luxury of going again. It's one lap. It's one lap only, and if you make a mistake, and we've seen a few people, I think the most primary, a lot of the track cuts that do come up is because people take too much curb at the chase, or they try and bite off more than they can chew, and they get it wrong, and they end up launching all 4 wheels over the curb at the chase. That's the primary area where people have trouble. And then the other one is your approach to Skyline. If you're just a little bit too late on the brakes coming into Skyline and then down through the S's and into the dipper, then you've got that nice little bit of runoff road to the left that you can bail out on if you make the mistake to avoid hitting the wall. The problem is you get a track cut between that as well if you're going too fast. And of course, on top of that, if you're going to take the escape road, your lap's over anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, yeah. I've I had ideas and they completely disappeared before I opened my mouth. It needs to stop doing that.
You sound you actually sound like you're actually eating at the moment, Rhodey, sometimes. So I think I need to let you actually sit down and eat your food.
No, I've eaten my food. I've been slowly munching on a salad across the length of the night, and it's the real nice leafy green. So it, yeah. There's still a little bits of lettuce floating around. So that's probably why you're hearing crunching sounds. But I have stopped eating. I will not be touching the salad again until we're done with the shootout.
All right, so first man out. Here we go, Phil Boak. So what a return. He's done a couple of development series rounds. I think he was also in the list at one stage to do a round, I think a wildcard appearance he made at Barbagallo earlier this year. We haven't seen a lot of him. So for Phil Boak, it's really, really pleasing to see a return of one of the top flight drivers from the last couple of years after some family commitments and second child. He's back out there right now and about to absolutely give it a crack, as you said, Rhodey. He's got nothing to lose, and we want to see him really deliver and see what he can actually produce for this one. So his lap to get into the shootout was a 2:05.488. So I actually said that the cutoff was going to be a 5 flat. Turned out that it was a 5.4, and there was a couple of people that missed out by fractions getting into the top 10 shootout. Bailey Hall, the most notable name. So here we go with Phil Boak into the last corner and about to have the privilege of having the mountain to himself, and it's all eyes on car 046 as we head down to Hell Corner for the first time. And very loose. Could see it even from the onboard camera. We didn't even need to show you the outside shot. That car was wild. The rear end was absolutely skating into turn number 1, and that's going to hurt him all the way up Mountain Straight.
Yeah, I do know that, I don't know to be fair, I've got a pretty good confidence he's running one of Foley's setups. Foley has been working on the setup obviously for the car, been the driver with the predominant lap time available to him in the practice leading up to tonight's session. So I imagine it will be a Foley setup. Boki does drive Foley setups, but it's been a while since he's been on one, so it's very much trying to get himself back into the picture. He's made the wall there again, which is cutting himself a little bit of time. That said, he's still going to have a pretty good run through the first sector. It's going to be a 53.5, which isn't too bad, but I'm not sure it compares too well to the time he used to get in.
No, he was a 52.8 to get into the shootout in the first sector, so he's already 7 tenths behind the 8 ball, but he's having a crack. Oh, he's 2 wheels in the grass as well, a la Scott McLaughlin, and I think also Peter Brock's done that in the years gone past as well at McPhillamy Park. Dropped a few wheels off the side.
He's been lucky at Skyline there, just coming over the other side of the hill. He nearly got all 4 wheels over the other side of the curb, which would have been a track cut if he'd got that. I think he, millimeters away from a track cut. So, look, as we mentioned, look, he's going to get 10th if worst happens. So he's out there and he's having a go. And you know what? Good on him. It's maybe not going to be a pace that's going to get him positions, but the advantage is if he does at least complete this lap, he's still in the window to pick up a few spots if some of the drivers ahead of him throw it in a bit too hard and end up making the fence.
That's right. So the important thing is now he's made all those mistakes over the top of the mountain. He's just got to post the time because that's the important piece here. Car's a little bit wiggly under brakes. He just pulls it up for the chase, makes the apex, doesn't hit the curb. Now comes down to the final corner. This has been a little bit of an untidy lap at times for Phil Boak, but he's now coming through the last corner, and the time on the clock, actually it's a track violation, so he got done somewhere around the lap, and he's not happy about it and shows his displeasure as he goes down into turn 1. Phil, talk to us, because it looked a bit out of control from the minute you left turn 1.
Yeah, it's just pretty average. 2 more mistakes, and then I just lost the rear over Skyline and took too much curb, and it gave me a cut, so I knew it was done. A little bit frustrating, but that's the way it goes.
Pretty straightforward. Well, the important thing is you started 10th you qualified 10th, you're going to be starting 10th, and at the end of the day, for you, the important thing is you could only go up from there. So you've gained nothing by having a crack. You're still in the top 10. You start 10th tomorrow.
That was it. That was the theory. I couldn't go any further back, but yeah, wish I did a better job. But yeah, anyway, see how tomorrow goes.
Absolutely. So he's going to pull up a pew and have a look here. Oh, Liccardo in the fence!
Yeah,
Oh
he's
my
made to
goodness
the
gracious
fence.
me!
Yeah, I was just about to cut in. He's made to the fence on the run to start his lap. He is actually currently buried in the sand trap. So I'm not sure what sort of run he's going to get here. He's not going to be able to. He's going to have to reverse out of the gravel trap. Luckily, the car following him won't have been released, but
No,
he's
it's
going to sit
not.
there, burn up his tyres. Definitely hitting the tyres, hitting the engine as well, which is not ideal. He will get out of the sand trap, I believe.
Oh, he's
although
going
the
to be
car is
very
starting to
careful.
pivot.
Yeah.
So there we go. He's going forward now, but he's going to get zero run up to the start of the lap. So he's going to be down through the first sector pretty comfortably. So he's already on the back foot starting this lap.
Now the important thing for Liccardo is what other damage has that done? Has it got some right hand down or some left hand down? You can see already it's missed the apex by a mile at turn number 1. As well as the bonnet missing, has there suspension damage? Is it going to have a lock-up going up the hill into the hard braking zones or coming into the chase? What's going to happen? Liccardo's just going to probably want to try and post a time here and just actually have something to deal with. Just checking the car there, seeing if he's got something underneath him. I don't think this is now going to be a 100% push lap. This is basically just a salvage lap and get to the finish, because as he's already just seen, Phil Boak didn't post a time. So if Liccardo didn't even get to the start-finish line, he would actually be 10th. Boak would be elevated to 9th. And, well, for Liccardo's sake, it would be on the same row. It would just be on the opposite side of the row. He's done a 55.1 in the first sector, which is, as we've seen, is miles off anything that was be representative to get into the shootout. But, well, the shooteth giveth, and the shootout taketh away, Rhodey.
Yeah, and look, it was the easiest place to do it. We've seen, I think it was Van Gisbergen, or it might have even been his co-driver a couple of years ago, do it at the restart of the race from the head of the queue, just run a little bit too deep and have to flick spin the car. Ideally, 2020 hindsight, that would have been Dane's best option, is to try and spoot the car off to the right, not so aggressively risk going backwards by the way the track decrees, and picking up a penalty for doing so in that form. But that really would have been his best option. I think he's gone away without a puncture. He's going to definitely have aero damage, possibly suspension damage. He's probably got some steering damage too. Looking at some of the way the car's tracking from the inboard camera, there does look to be a little bit of right hand down. Look, it's going to be a lap, I think, at this stage still.
Yes.
So same thing for Boki. Look, he's gonna beat guys that don't set a time, but a 2:09.2. That's not what you want to be doing in a Bathurst top 10 shootout.
No, what an anticlimactic sort of result for Liccardo there. I don't know what to say. We're not going to bring him up for an interview, obviously, for this one. He was sitting down the chat below, but I can tell what it's going to be. It's going to be full of expletives.
Yeah,
so we'll leave that one alone, and he'll just need to gather his thoughts and focus on tomorrow. The important thing is he's got a time on the board. So that means he starts where he qualifies, essentially in 9th, barring anybody else making any further mistakes. Well, speaking of mistakes, this guy made a pretty major blunder last night when it came to the pit stop strategy. We've already alluded to it. Noah Turra, he has got some point to prove. And setting a 5, what did he set to get into the shootout? He set a 5.050 to get into the shootout, which was pretty representative compared to what he did yesterday evening to snatch the front pole position for the development series race, but it all went downhill from there. So redemption is on his mind right about now.
Absolutely. So yeah, as I said, that stuff plays into your thinking, whether you've had a bad round before, whether it's flashbacks to a previous moment we mentioned with Will, mentioned with Kurt, or whether it's just, you're right, redemption from last night. There were a couple of drivers in the field with that opportunity. He isn't qualifying tonight, but Nathan Higginson's another one in that boat as well. Noah's got some really good pace, and look, unsurprisingly, green or purple in the first sector, not a surprise though, considering Dane's pace. He's probably worked out to be just over a second up on Boki during the first sector. And as we saw, Boki, look, he's having a go, but that car maybe wasn't quite underneath him the way he wanted it to be. So Noah's going to be the first at this stage to set a representative time. And getting down to the hairpin, now we're going to see where his sector 2 mark is. He's probably going to be a couple of seconds clearer again, and he is 3 seconds up on Licato's time.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, the purple sector's coming in at the moment. So just matching them off against the sector times he did to get into the shootout. So he was a 52.6 in Sector 1. It was a 52.4 in Sector 1 on his qualifying lap. 34.3 in qualifying in the middle sector. 34.2 in the second sector on his shootout lap. So he's about a tenth behind as it sits right now relative to where he was to get into the shootout on the 5 flat. If you go close to replicating your qualifying lap, you're doing pretty well. He gets into the final corner there. It didn't look like it was going to pull up for a second, and he loses another 2 tenths in the final sector. So goes in with a 5.3, qualified with a 5.0. So I'd say for Noah Turra, pretty successful outcome. Within 3 tenths is nothing to be frowned upon there.
No, that was a very good run, and look, yeah, like ideally you want to go faster than you did in qualifying if you've got the pace there, but still within a couple of tenths, that's good. And look, crucially, he got around a lap at race pace, didn't clatter the fence, didn't get a track cut, didn't pick up any damage. So it's all things considered, it's sort of it's not his first year in the Enduros, but it's sort of his first year he's really starting to show his colours and show where his pace is at. So. Very good run for him, and definitely is going to put him in a good stead for tomorrow's race.
Absolutely. So Tim Redmond now the next one up. First of the Kiwi runners for the top 10 shootout. 204.986 was his entry lap for the shootout. And he did have a couple of big moments during qualifying and in practice as well, and had to get himself gathered up pretty quickly to set the time that he did to get into the shootout. So just cleared what I would have deemed to have been the cut-off mark at the 5 flat. And let's keep an eye on those sector splits as he goes up the mountain. So the first one that we're looking for, what he did to qualify to get into the shootout, was a 52.765. So that's the marker that we'll expect on the other side of Reed Park. And he's looking very tidy so far, Rhodey.
Yeah, very good run up the hill now. He's going to get a pretty good run through the cutting itself. It's a very nice run through the cutting itself. Kept the car under him. Didn't have understeer, didn't have oversteer with the car. Very good run actually through here as well. Oh, a bit of a slide. He actually nearly made it into the PRD Automotive outside wall there. Less than ideal, but it's got a pretty good run back through over the top of the hill. The car's behaving the way you want it to. And this is going to be a pretty good run up to the top of the hill.
Just had a little bit of a correction on the run up through underneath the tree as well, and had to gather it up, but he was about 2 tenths behind the marker at Sector 1. Now down through the dip up and on his way towards Forest Elbow. And on the other side of the elbow, we'll get the second sector split. So for Tim to get into the shootout, that split was a 34.0. Comes across the line, he's about 5 tenths away. It was a 34.4 for Redmond this time around. So he's about 6 tenths behind what he did to get into the shootout. So tracking like he's going to be in the mid-5s at the moment, but possibly going conservative. That's the bit that you were talking about, Rhodey. You've qualified, you're in the shootout. If things don't feel like they're going your way, the best thing to do is to just back it off by, 1% or 2%. Make sure you get to the line, make sure you put the lap on the board, because otherwise you're going to be in a really bad spot if you don't post a time. Redmond gets to the line. It's a 5.8 for Tim, so he did lose a little bit more in the last sector there. But Tim, importantly for you, it's a lap on the board.
Yeah, that's right, Nether. Fortunately, I wasn't as confident on this lap as I have been earlier in the night, and been carrying a bit of an injury throughout the week, so I haven't had as much practice as I'd like as well. But as you said, time on the board is time on the board, and I'm still happy with the 5 at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, we heard that you've had some, some foot swelling dramas as well, so not sort of really the type of injury you want to have coming into a 500-kilometre race tomorrow.
No, that's right. Yeah, managed to get the swelling down, thankfully, but still a bit niggly. So, yeah, happy to be here.
Good luck for tomorrow.
Thanks, mate.
All right, over to his countryman, Braxton Stancliffe. Here we go. Now, this man's probably going to leave it all on the line here, Rhodey, because remember last year, he really gave it a crack and threw it away. And another one that's going to be looking for a little bit of redemption for sins of the past.
Yeah, he was very aggressive with his tyre warming. I caught him as he was going down Conrod. He very nearly looped as he came over the rise at Conrod at probably a good 260 k's an hour. very quick steering, you get off the throttle to catch the rear of that car and bring it back under control. But look, those tires when we warm, you know, that driver is going to be pretty well heated up into that helmet, and Braxton could be, I think Braxton, a couple of drivers who has wheeled out the helmet from time to time just to really get the immersion going. But either way, look, he's looking pretty good, and he's got a pretty aggressive run going to the start of the lap so far.
Absolutely, and it looks fairly composed and fairly tidy again, like his countryman Tim Redmond. He hasn't really had any major dramas, although slides it up to the wall. That's not too bad, and he's about a tenth and a little bit away from Noah Tara's time. He got the curb there, and that fed him into the fence. Thankfully not up onto two wheels like we saw from Greg Nangle several years ago. Now it's starting to get a little bit out of control as he starts to feel the car under him, wants to push, wants to make it respond, wants to extract a little bit more time out of it. It's starting to bite. He's just got to be very careful he doesn't overstep the mark here.
Yeah, they talk about that to get down the hill effectively you could be a ballet dancer, and this is looking a bit more like a boxing match between Braxton and his car. He has got it to the bottom of the hill though pretty cleanly. He actually didn't lose too much time despite smacking the wall like he did, and with that little bit of the slide under the tree. The crucial bit for him is, has he got a better run down Conrod than Noah Tara? And the answer is, I'm not sure. We're going to see that as he gets to the chase itself.
He's not doing too bad. He actually didn't lose a huge amount of time over the top of the hill, despite the little slap on the wall coming out of Repark at Silman Park, where he clipped the curb and then sort of fed him a bit wide. He sort of has held that margin to Noah Tara to about a tenth. And here he comes down to the final corner. Has he got anything left? Can he surge back ahead of the Flinders Autosport Commodore? He can. Oh. He found a little bit when it mattered most. He found those 2 tenths to just drag the 187 machine back into his spot that he started and ahead of Noah Tara. Brax, we know you threw away your quali lap last year and you're a bit gutted with yourself for doing it. Is that redemption for you?
Yeah, I feel like it is a wee bit. Still not overly satisfied. I know I've got a lot more time than that, but I'm happy to be sitting where I am now, knowing that at least I won't be starting last. So there's always a chance for faster drivers to come out and bail their lap or have something go wrong. So we'll see where we end up for the start of tomorrow's race, but I'm quite happy with that.
Absolutely, I would be too. Good on you, mate. Well done.
Cheers, mate.
All right, so we're halfway through the shootout. We've now got half the drivers to go. This was the man who qualified with the 5th quickest time, Hans Brunswick, of 2:04.843. He was just fractionally ahead of Braxton Stancliffe in those standings when it was all settled after the first 30 minutes. What has Hans Brunswick got in this 111 machine, Roddy? Because remember, this was the wild card here last year, the underdogs that outperformed absolutely everybody's expectations and ended up 3rd overall in the Enduro Cup standings as a result.
Yeah, this year they've got sort of full factory backing with AAR, both running the Golf SS liveries this year. And pretty good pace so far for Hans Brunswick, and he is up by 2 tenths of a second through the first sector. 2
tenths up on Noah Tara's time, about a tenth shy of his own time, so looking very handy right about now aboard the 111 machine as he now gets to the point where you crest over the top of the hill and you start to head down. This is the ballet dancer bit that you were alluding to a little bit earlier, Rhodey. Here we go, on board with Hans Brunswick, heading down towards the elbow. It's, again, a very tidy lap. Not too many overcorrections, not too many issues. On the other side of the elbow, he found a little bit more time, so he's ticking all the boxes here. 2 purple sectors for Hans Brunswick, 52.5, 34.1, so he's about a tenth shy in each sector so far of his own lap that he used to get into the shootout. So doing a very good job of replicating that qualifying lap, or getting very close to it at least.
Yeah, he's looking pretty comfortable as if he's going to make it into the 5. I did see a bit of, I think, an early upshift there coming out of the chase itself through that right-hander, which will have affected a little bit of acceleration for him on the run onto the straight. But he now gets to the final corner, gets to the line, and it is
good
first,
time.
Only a tenth of a second, but still in pole, but not the first into the 4s. We do now have Hans Brunswick with us. Hans, that was a pretty good lap.
Yeah, thanks, Rhodey. Just a little bit wasn't too good in the final sector, but I think, you know, 5 5:09, I think it's good enough, and that was probably what I was about aiming for anyway. So we'll press on and see how we go tomorrow.
Absolutely, puts you in good stead for tomorrow, mate. Have a good one.
Thank you, boys. Have a good one.
All right,
Switching now over to, sorry, yep, I'll let you go.
Sorry, mate. From one Mustang driver to another, Brendan Ross. So his time to get in was a 4:08.1, fractionally behind Will Devonish, but not by very much. So the number 5 team has been Mustang. Here we go. So just 4 drivers left to go in the shootout. So far, it's sort of playing out as expected. Everybody's sort of just jumping above everybody else, just by a little bit here. So the shootout order's not really changing too much, Rhodey. That's the important thing at the moment. Nobody's really set the timing screens alight. Nobody's jumped up over the top of anybody else. And a few drivers have got pretty close to their times, but nothing significant. So this is a little bit of a different shootout to years gone past.
The only question, and I said, I was about to say something, but he looks like he might be answering the question for me, Brendan Ross in the has-beens machine. He was less than a tenth off the back of Will Devonish in qualifying. Will could go quicker, and so could Rossi. I know they've been alluding about times that their car's capable of. That said, they're well in excess of what I heard them talking about a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure whether that was then race times they were planning, whether that was quality times, but look, pretty good run so far for Brendan Ross. He is down marginally in the first sector, but not by enough to really cancel out a lap for him.
No, nothing in it. His time across the top was, or heading up to Sector 1, was virtually identical to Hans Brunswick's time, and same sort of statement, about a tenth off his time in Sector 1 that got him into the shootout to begin with. So this is now where it starts to get quite tight and quite interesting for Brendan Ross. He's a little bit awkward at the elbow there. He would have liked to have been a little bit further to the right. He's narrowed up the approach there. It hasn't hurt him though. He's actually flipped the script by a tenth. So he's gone from being 200ths down at Sector 1 to 800ths up at Sector 2. So he's found a little bit with a purple middle sector of a 34 flat.
Yeah, so that's a really good run there through, and he has brought it back. And look, that's probably going to stand pretty well, as at least with him and Will, probably the quicker of the two across the top of the hill. Still a little bit of sideways in the back of that car, though. Maybe not quite the setup they want, or maybe they're just having to push it that hard on the qualifying tune. Coming now down to the final corner, looking at a good run off the curve. Actually, very nice run. Oh, bit of a wobble there again. It's going to be pretty close, but no.
Found more time.
Comfortable.
Found more time in the last sector, so got a really good run off of the elbow and goes 6/10 behind his time to get into the shootout. But for you, Brendan Ross, well, that puts you probably at least at bare minimum where you entered the shootout starting tomorrow.
Yeah, it's pretty much where I probably expected. Definitely when you got the likes of like the ASC guys and McFarlane, Luke, and probably Will ahead of us too, we're pretty much stuck with fourth. Third's probably the goal for tonight. Probably more likely Will go on behind us, but is what it is. Happy with the lap. A little bit off what probably would have wanted, but all in all, second row is pretty good.
Yeah, second row not too bad at all, and the man who is likely going to be on the second row with you if he replicates the time that he did to get into the shootout is on the screen right now. So Brendan Ross pull up a pew. Looks like he might be starting alongside Will Devonish if he puts the lap together. He said before his lap to get into the shootout was 400ths quicker than Brendan Ross. It wasn't much in it at all. It was a 4.041 as he heads up the hill and now into turn 2.
Yeah, and he's got a pretty good gap at the moment. You know, a 4.0 plays a 4.6, but we've seen a lot of drivers maybe aren't quite able to achieve their qualifying times in the shootout. Maybe a slightly cooler track, and maybe just the tyres or the setups or the drivers needing a bit more prep time in the lap to actually really get that time dialed in, and just not coming to them in a one-lap format. Pretty good run for Will so far up at the top of the hill. He's probably going to be pretty close to
wow.
No, actually, a couple of tenths up. So.
He has absolutely matched his time heading up the hill, I think, as well. So it was a 52.344 for him when he got into the shootout. And he's wide at McPhillamy Park. That's now going to throw all that away. It's about to say his 52.375 versus a 52.344 was almost a dead ringer match for his Sector 1 time that he did in qualifying, but he's now probably gone and just thrown that 2/10 and some more away at McPhillamy Park. A la Scott McLaughlin, knocked with a little bit more. He's lost a bit more, but he's actually not lost a lot. That's the bit for me. He's now, relative to Brendan Ross, he's still 1 3/4 tenths up but his middle sector was a 34.0, and in qualifying it was much better than that. It was a 33.6, so potentially it's 4/10 wiped off the board without that little mistake.
Absolutely. Look, but that's the thing. If Rossi and being the Pixel car is his focus, then he's going to be pretty comfortable at this point. Coming down now to the final corner, as he said, he's still got a 10th and a half in hand. He's going to be trying pretty hard to really sort of throw anything away from here. Pretty good run out of the last corner, and actually improves by a little bit again to do a 204.3.
4.3, so only 3/10 behind what he did to get into the shootout. So the mistake across the top of the mountain didn't rattle him. I think that's the important thing. He gathered it up, he pressed on, and his sector 3 time was a 37.895, and that was actually, believe it or not, that was quicker than his quickest lap to get in. So his last sector was a full 1.05 tenths quicker for his lap. So that's what did it there in the end, and gives him a margin of 3/10 of a second to Brendan Ross. Now, he's not sitting down in the broadcast interview chat for us to drag him up. So for Will Devonish, that is currently a third place starting grid slot for him tomorrow afternoon at best. Now, I also just noticed as well that McFarlane didn't leave the lane on time as well. So he's actually on an outlap right now behind Will Devonish on track, Brody. So this is actually a little bit unusual. We normally don't see these sorts of things unless something has broken. I think we've seen a few times this year with McFarlane having a few dramas that he's had to leave the game and come back into the game, and maybe something's just not agreed hardware-wise. But he's now out there on track, but got the benefit of seeing him for not only the flying lap, but for the better part of the out lap as well.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, a couple of drivers have had issues where it just comes to, it could just be as simple as you walked away to have a whiz and just miscalculated the time you had to get back in. But look, the last time, you're right, gets some more airtime for the sponsors. And look, AAR, for a team that's wrapping up at the end of this season, as Luke Rosella reeled to us at the end of Supercars, broadcast at Pukekohe, they're the only team to have gotten both their cars, the only two-car team, well, actually really two-plus car team, to have gotten all of their cars, 100% of their entries into the shootout for Bathurst. So still a really competitive team, despite the fact that, the future from the end of this year doesn't look all that peachy. But look, Corey McFarlane's now behind the wheel at the number 55, qualifying for Luke Rosella. Interesting decision, but they're both pretty good on pace, so it'll be interesting to see how Corey goes for his lap.
Yeah, that was the interesting bit that struck me when I saw the names in the practice server when it opened at 6 p.m. was that it was McFarlane and not Rosella, and I thought maybe Corey was just doing a bit of the prep work for Luke to come swooping in later and try and keep his qualifying lap record. But no, a bit of an interesting decision, as you said, to put McFarlane in the car. So he's got the pace at the moment, provisionally on the front row. He's got to convert that into a lap here in the shootout. He did all right. He was only one of two men to go sub 204. He did a 203.547 for his best lap aboard car number 55 to get into the shootout. So here he goes up the mountain and now through to the cutting. So the first sector marker we're going to be looking for to see if he can get close to is a 52.164. That was the mark that comes up just on the other side of the PRD automotive signage here. 52.1 is the time we're looking for. It's a 52.2. So that's three consecutive drivers now that are about a tenth away from their own sector times that got them into the shootout. Crucially for McFarlane, it's actually got him 2/10 ahead of Brendan Ross and Will Devonish.
Yeah, so like he's done a bit of margin out. Like that was the biggest concern, I think, for Corey. Some drivers have been sort of tailing themselves. I think most drivers have tailed themselves from their qualifying times. Some of them have been by 10, some of them have been closer to 4 or 5 tenths, while still actually, just putting a genuine lap together. So that's probably Corey's biggest concern. But no, he's pretty comfortable now. He's put another 2 tenths on Will Devonish. Will's had a slightly scrubbish run over the top, but still, some really good pace aboard the number 55, and he's just got the back third of the circuit left to go.
Yeah, he's about 3/10 away from his own sector time at sector 2 marker, but that won't trouble him. He's got 3/10 in his pocket right now, so it'll be good enough for a 4 flat when he gets to the line this time around, if he keeps that pace going. It didn't look like there was any major mistakes over the top of the mountain, just a little bit of a lock-up coming into the elbow. And a little bit of an awkward moment just into the chase, but not too bad there. And it's a 4 flat, just shy of a 4.1. So he lost a little bit of time in the final sector, but still had enough time up his sleeve to provisionally go into pole position. And what currently the worst he can do right now is we'll be at a second spot, which, well, we suspect, Rody, that's what's about to happen.
Absolutely. No, pretty good run for Corey there. And look, you're right. A couple of, I don't think he's actually managed to match their pace that they used to get into qualifying, into the shootout. But still a pretty good lap. Built enough of a margin they needed over Will Devonish and Brendan Ross to ensure that Corey McFarlane will be starting on the front row of the grid, whatever happens next. But speaking of next, we have got the wildcard entry for this round. Dane Warren behind the wheel, and we'll be sharing with Kurt Stenberg tomorrow. Look, we didn't catch much of him in the qualifying, but to be fair, he was class of the field from the first lap into the session. But important thing, he's in the shootout, so he gets a lap of TV time all to himself.
That is precisely right. He gets a lap of TV time to himself, and I think a few of the people in the live chat wanted to go on board here and have a little bit of a look just to see what he was up to. Have a listen to how he applies the throttle, because he is one of the premier drivers in Australia when it comes to racing, any form of sim racing. And here we go for a lap around Mount Panorama with Dane Warren out of the final corner, across the start-finish line, heading towards Hell Corner. Where does he want to hit the anchors? Right on the 100-metre marker. Gets the apex, makes it beautifully, doesn't hit the curb on the inside, uses the curb precisely on the exit. Now gets a really nice run up Mountain Straight.
Yeah, very smooth run, just slowly trimming it over the left to get to the turning point for Griffin's Bend. Very nice run. He's just going to run to about the kilometre of fifth, backed it down from the 100-metre board, back down to second gear he uses through here. Second and third are an option. Second, give it a short shift, though. Managed the wheel spin, he's done that, got it up over the curb. The rear didn't spray sideways, kept the car very well underneath him, and now coming up towards the cutting.
Through the cutting, keeps it tucked in nicely, applies the throttle. A little bit squirrel in the exit, but he had it under control. Up now through Reed Park and under the tree, slides up to the fence, gets it nicely there. The time is pretty impressive, 51.7 at the first sector split. 5.5 tenths clear now of Corey McFarlane's current benchmark. So it was a 51.7 when he actually did his lap to get into the shootout. It was about a 50, it was closer to a 51.8, so he's actually improved upon the marker at sector 1. Now dancing it down the hill. Needs to try and keep it to the right. He does keep to the right. He narrows up the approach a little bit later than we saw Brendan Ross do, coming into the elbow and out the other side. Doubles the advantage. So doubles it to 1.2 seconds to the good. 33.1 through the middle sector. A little bit the other way this time. So his shootout lap was a little bit slower compared to... No, sorry, the other way around. It was his shootout lap is a little bit quicker in sector 2 compared to the lap that put him in. So a 202.629 was the marker that he laid down to get into the top 10 shootout. And now just the final corner to go. We did say it was pretty much a fait accompli at the beginning of the show, and it's proven to be the case. He does a 2.5. He actually is the only driver to improve upon his shootout lap, upon his qualifying lap to get into the shootout.
Yeah, and that was a really, really solid run. You're right. They're only driver to actually not only to match, but to improve upon their qualifying laps. And you've got half an hour session to really dial it in. You've got to get it all under you within a lap. And no, that was a really, really good lap from Dane. The only point where there was any violence in the car when he needed it, he was definitely putting the engine through its paces on the downshifts, but he was, running a razor tooth edge there. He was, just getting the maximum engine braking from the car without risking the rear locking, without risking engine destruction. Look, you could probably find another 10th or two around Bathurst if you're really cranked in the micro sectors, but that's probably as close as we're going to come to a perfect lap of Bathurst around here.
I think so. Now, the only interesting point, I want to raise this right now, there was only one change of position in the shootout, and it was a change between Tim Redmond and Noah Turra. Noah Turra went up one spot. So he went up to 7th after it was all said and done, and Redmond went back to 8th, and when he qualified 7th quickest. So that was the only change in the shootout. The absolute only change of position in the shootout, which is absolutely mind-boggling when you think about it, Roddy, because as we said, over the course of many years of ASR now, we've seen the shootouts across the years change the top 10 order absolutely, at will. There's been at least, 2 or 3 major changes of spots, but just one spot, absolutely just one spot
Yeah.
changed between 2 drivers. That was it.
I don't know whether everyone's perfected the top 10 shootout at now at Bathurst, and maybe come a couple of seasons time, if we're on RF2, whether we need to introduce some random rolling weather through just to really shake it up right. I don't know, but yeah, it looks like everybody in there at least pretty acclimatized. I mean, the exceptions to the rule were Phil Boak, who had a pretty good run, just the car wasn't quite under him, and Dan Liccardo, who unfortunately picked, well, arguably, I'm not sure if it was better for him to do that on his actual flying lap, but at least, well, it's much of a muchness to be fair. But definitely the worst session to stuff up a start of a qualifying lap. Otherwise, look, everybody did about what they did to get in, give or take a couple of tenths, with the exception of Dane Warren, that amazingly, despite having done that 2.6 in qualifying, still had something in the tank, and 2.026, and managed to get into a 2.025, which look, we're talking about records being broken. I don't think that one's going to be touched for a while.
No, definitely not. I don't see that one actually being touched for quite some time. I think Dane Warren, still holds another one of the records somewhere on the ASR record books as well. I'm just struggling to remember which one it is. It's one of the supercar records, and I think it might have been a Pukekohe one at one stage for a 101.9. So there was plenty of people that think they might be able to get close to it, but these days, it's not going to be an easy feat to try and break some of those records. They'll stand for quite some time. And with that, I guess we say qualifying and the shootout is concluded. So there is a grid that is now officially set. We'll see, the better part of 21 or so cars that will take to the grid for the Bathurst 500 tomorrow. Just a reminder, it's here on Outworld Broadcasting starting at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We'll be on air for the 3.5 hour or so 500 kilometre endurance event. So until then, we will see you then. So bye for now.